semana, que indietera I acknowledge the presence of the Greek Consul General for Adelaide, Mr. Spiros Sarris. Thank you for coming. I know you're a busy man. Greece, 200 years, has been a rather sad time because of COVID. It has really destroyed whatever plans we had to celebrate, whether here or in Greece, or both, as it would have been in my case. In 1971, I had the pleasure of being in Greece for the first time after migrating to Australia in 1954, and I was there for the 150th celebrations. Admittedly, it was August, but the presence of celebratory events throughout the year was manifest in, especially on, I was on roads most of that time, and around the Kappadokoulos, you could not move for Greek soldiers, Greek flags, everything was celebratory. I promised to myself that in 2021 I'd be there for the 200. Dystυχώς, it didn't happen. This is my very puny effort to make up for it. As Peter said, I have a strong interest in archaeology, and I was very interested to see that we mentioned the island of Andros before, and there's a film on archaeology as well for Yeraki. Archaeology permeates the entire Greek mind, whether it's in Greece or away from Greece, everywhere archaeology permeates it, because it links what happened in the past with the present. And a lot of other countries copy our Hellenic culture in various ways. For those of you who watched Euro 2020, which was played in 2021, you saw the trophy. That is a direct copy from an amphora found in Greece, and it's in the museum, I think it's in the Athens, it's in a museum in Greece, and the designer of the Euro Cup used exactly the same galoupi to present it. The ancient one has a naked athlete with his foot up like that and a soccer ball, a ball on his, and a little kid is watching. If you Google, you'll find the comparisons of the two. Absolutely amazing. So everything, if you go to European cities, or you go to American cities, you'll see Doric columns, you see replicas of the Parthenon. In Germany, there's Pergamon replicated. Everyone wanted to copy the Greek. My talk today will be how Europe got involved in Greek archaeology and how the Greek state in those early days was able to get on top of that, considering that the day before they had guns, swords, blood on their fighting, and then suddenly they've got to set up a state, a governing state. And of all the things to think about is archaeology. I mean, there's no social security, there's no eco, there's no employment, there's no nothing, but they had to worry about evrimata, findings, because there would have been a lot of looting, and it wasn't just the organ. You know, the wing Niki of Samothraki in the Louvre was not an Elgin job, it was a French job. There's big stories about how much went away. So, that was a bit of preamble for me.
Sorry, may I ask the Euro 2000 Cup?
Yes.
Was it only for this year, or is it?
It was the 2020 event, yeah. No, it's the Cup.
Yeah, or is it the same cup every year? Like
It passes on. Yeah, it's the Championship Cup, and the winning side gets it, same as the
like the
FA Cup and the FA Cup. Yeah, but the design is straight out of classical archaeology. The first Hellenic Republic came into being, if we can call it that, from 1822 onwards, when after the commencement of hostilities of the revolution, because there were hostilities before. And until 1827, it's commonly referred to in the history book as the First Hellenic Republic. And it was also known as the Provisional Administration of Greece between 1827 and 1832. In 1832, it then became a non-constitutional monarchy when King Otto came along. Now, these are key dates. First Greek flag of the time was, there were many versions of Greek flags all over Greece, but eventually the government sort of went for one of them, and that's the one it went for. Of course, we've got the Finika Rising, and our friend Mr. Kapodistrias, who was the first.
If I may interject here to point out that the first depiction you have here is the reverse side of the first coin of the modern Greek state, the Phoenix.
Yes.
The Phoenix, the silver. Yeah. I have one in my collection.
You are. I'm jealous. So when you go and read books and you look at the first Hellenic Republic, etc., just bear in mind that things started to get organised when the revolution started. But as you can imagine, with so much fighting going on, there was precious little in the way of getting things done at a national level. It was all topika, right? Okay. And having mentioned the first Greek Republic, the Kingdom of Greece went from 1832 until 1934, and then we had the second and third republics. In between there was a bit of monarchy, where they got rid of the king and then brought him back, and then so. And the Third Republic, you could look that up yourselves, but it goes from monarchy to republic, and in 1974, the last plebiscite voted for a republic, and we've had a republic ever since. While I said that the first monarchy was not a constitutional monarchy, it was a direct governed type of monarchy. In 1844, with the revolt of the Syntagma Revolution, they ended up getting a constitutional monarchy. You've got to read the memoirs of Maglianis on this to really understand what happened there. Okay, modern Greek state. The very first rendition of what we could call a modern Greek state, because what we've got to understand is classical Greece did not have borders as a nation. There is no political entity called Greece. There were people who spoke Greek, there were people who shared custom, religion, trade, everything else, but there were also non-Greeks there. It was not, it was a very porous border, politically speaking. The concept of modern states is post-Renaissance, when Europe starts to organise itself into states. So the very first bit, by 1830, the first entity is this light green here, which includes the Cycladic Islands. By the way, that's Andros there, in case we mentioned before. And those islands, there's Skopelos, Skiathos, and of course Peloponnese, centred around Nathra, which was the first capital. But it excludes, of course, all the Ionian Islands, Crete, etc. By 1832, there was a slight giving and taking, and we ended up with getting that section there. So we have, that's about the Thessaly line there, I think, right? And that really was the 1832 state of play. And that's the purple one I just showed you before. I'm sorry for the quality of this, but unfortunately I wasn't able to give you a better rendition. However, if I can just read this better. Britain gave us the islands, the Ionian Islands of Cessation in 1864. The Ottomans gave us the central part of North Greece in 1881. The Balkan War gave us the Green and Crete, formally. Although Crete had an 1897 administration, the formal integration occurred with the Balkan War. Bulgaria, after 1919, had to give up that. We got that. And unfortunately, with the Treaty of Sevres gave us the yellow, but the Treaty of Lausanne meant that all that disappeared. And in 1947, the Dodecanese were embodied into the modern Greek state, which is roughly where we are at the moment. Not forgetting Globus or a lot of people tend to forget it. So you can see when we talk about Greece, we talk about a changing entity in over 200 years. It didn't suddenly have Greece as we know it today. It grew. It grew through battles, diplomacy, arm wrestling, whatever. Wins and losses. And that's what we have at the moment. Archaeology. We were always worried as Greeks about what was happening to our treasures, because the Ottoman Empire was they dealt in commerce and bakshish. A lot of people from the West came and took things, right? And a lot of them were, and I hate to say this, Mr. Consul General, but the Consul General of Britain on Rhodes has a lot to answer for. He was an Italian by heritage, and he took an awful lot of stuff that ended up in the British Museum. But the consuls would be recognised by the Ottoman Empire, and they would go in, and they were basically the eyes and ears of foreign governments, but they also made a big trade in stolen artefacts. Big trade, serious trade, because people in Europe were prepared to pay deep. Right? And of course the Sultan got a bit on the side as well. And the bribery was very simple. They'd go to villages, and what would they do? They'll say, we'll buy all your wheat, we'll buy all your olives, all of your oil, but you have to give us those things, otherwise we won't buy from you. What happens? Stuff disappears. Okay, everyone, as soon as the modern Greek state was created, the schools began to line, these foreign entities wanted to come into Greece to do excavations formally, because the modern Greek state, one of the very first things it did, Kallistos, declared that all archaeology, artifacts, everything belongs to the state. That was in 1832. No one could move anything without the permission of the government. Right? One of the very first laws that passed in 1832. The Greek Archaeological Service is the earliest archaeological service in Europe. No one had an archaeological service before. Bearing in mind that Pompeii was discovered in 1790 or 1780, there was no standard archaeological formulas. There was no standard texts on how to do things.
Did it exist as a science, archaeology? It existed as a science, archaeology?
No, not as a science. I mean, the first archaeologist after the birth of Christ was Constantine's mother, Hellenic. She got sent to Jerusalem to find the cross. That's archaeology. To find remnants of the existence of the Christ. there was, when people started to find things, and they were finding them all the way along, people were taking bricks and reusing them as building blocks. Right? There was no, but as soon as the Greek government came into being, in amongst all that battles and everything, one of the laws they passed very early in the piece was the evremata, the archaeological sites, anything discovered or not discovered belongs to the state. It was founded in 1833. And King Otto signed the law making the findings as such. And the Greek Archaeological Service has responsibility for all archaeological excavations, museums, and the country's archaeological heritage, which covers the Banda. The first museum was founded in 1828, the 21st of October, at Aegina, which was, for a time, very early, the first capital before Nafplion and Athens of Greece, the island of Aegina. So you can see, and that was created by the governor of Greece, at the independent Greece, if we can call it that, Mr. Kapodistis. 21st of October, 1828. It subsequently became the first national archaeological museum. When Kapodistis then renamed it in 1829. So originally it was the Museum of Aegina, but within a year it had upped its status to a national museum. In pre-revolutionary years, educated people saved antiquities and prevented their transfer to Western countries by the monarchy. Corres introduced the Greeks attempted to save antiquities from destruction in the revolution. However, it was only Yannis Kapodistis, the first governor, who prohibited the illicit trafficking of antiquities and founded the first museum. King Otto founded the Greek Archaeological Service, and with a limited staff, introduced legislation in 1834, which clearly states the antiquities belong to the Greek state. And these are laws in the Greek archive. In the late 19th century, according to a law, all antiquities belong to the Greek state. It was repeated again. Marks the Greek archaeological legislation. It includes past regulations for the protection of antiquities, which are valid up till the present. In other words, they formed the corpus of all the laws they passed before that, reissued it again and said the state owns it. So, from 1828 onwards, the Greek culture entities that were created then included the Museum of Aegina, which later became the first national archaeological museum of Greece. In 1832, we have the Archaeological Service. In 1834, the Numismatic Museum was created in 1834. When was the first coins issued?
The interesting thing is that the first ancient Greek coin was cut in Aegina, and it depicts on the weavers a tortoise.
6th century, BC.
And the first coin of modern Greece also was cut in Aegina.
Which at the time was the capital.
Now, the Numismatic Museum is the only one in the Balkans, one of the best in Europe, one of the best in the world actually, and I recommend to everybody to go and see it. I'm a member of it myself, but it's a fantastic museum.
Now, that Numismatic Museum is located in the house of Mr. Schliemann. Good old Mr. Schliemann. Now, in 1837, the Greek Archaeological Society was formed, which was also known as the Greek Archaeological Society of Athens initially, but eventually it settled for that name. In 1865, the old Acropolis Museum started, which was a building behind the Parthenon. Right. And unfortunately, its best intentions, it caused a lot of damage to the Acropolis because of water gathering. I must have collected water, whatever, but it was not a good place to have a museum, not in the middle of an archaeological site. And it took them almost 150 years to get it out of there, but they did eventually. Who's been to the new Archaeological Museum? You have to go. It's one of those bucket list items. You must go. Interestingly, and I put this in as an aside, in 1914, the General State Archives were created in Greece, which is like the National Archives of Australia. Now, a lot of the writings, documentation, and things of the Archaeological Service and their society are in the state archives. So it's not just the archaeological part of it, you also got the General State Archives, GAC, they call themselves in Greek. Excuse me. And that too has 1914, roughly 100 years after the creation of modern Greece. So that came very late compared to what was happening with the archaeology. Foreign schools. The foreign schools, in basically that order, came in, and the first 6 were the original ones that came in that order, began to register themselves with the Greek government for permission to dig. Whenever you make a presentation like this, you could go on for hours. I'll keep it brief, but eventually, the current rules are that you get permission to dig 1 year, and normally they dig for about 6 to 8 weeks. In summer, in the break, they normally June, July, or May, June, depending on semesters. Because these are foreign schools, they lecture in their own countries. They come in the summer to do their dig. They dig 1 year and report the next. So it's not just, excuse me. It's not just digging and cleaning and putting it on a shelf. You have to report. The basis of your permission to dig in Greece is based on reporting. It's very important. So there they were the first. And where did they first excavate? Well, the French went to Olympia and Epidaurus. This is just a brief overview. There are more museums and archaeological sites in Greece that I care to mention. There are hundreds. I just pick a few just to give you an idea. So Olympia, the French went there, Epidaurus, the Greek Archaeological Service there went and did a much bigger dig. Keramikos in Athens was by the Germans. Mycenaean. Greece started to, Pitakis, who's an archaeologist, discovered the Lion Gate in 1841, the Lion Gate. However, it was Schliemann who found the tombs. Right? And since 1884, the Archaeological Society was digging there as well. Delphi was French. The Athens Agora was by the Archaeological Society in the 19th century, but the Americans have been there since 1931. That's the Athens Agora, downtown Monastyraki around the corner. Had the visiting professor joined us last year or this year from the American school, Professor Niles, she's the director of the American school, we would have had a brilliant presentation on what the Americans are doing with the Athens Agora, and she was also going to give us a talk on the Yanadis Library, which is under the curatorship of the Americans. It would have been a brilliant presentation. Like I said, it's been a summer of discontent. Knossos by the British, Evans in 1922. Marathon, the Greeks went there in 1894. Corinth, the American school. Sunyan was the Archaeological Society. They did preliminary, then they came across there and there. And Thermopylae, the Greeks did Thermopylae from 1930. Just to give you a small spattering, I haven't gone too far out to other places, just to give you an idea that they were doing things back there. We said the 6 original schools. There are a lot more. From 1948 onwards, we've had another 12 schools, the Australian one being number 10. We've been in Greece since 1980. Quite surprisingly, after more than 20 years, the Polish have come in as well. All of them have contractual relationships with the state, and they are rigidly enforced, the contractual arrangements. Yeah, everyone's got to do the right thing. The Archaeological Service of Greece is a big organisation. There are a lot of archaeologists, because they've got to spread themselves across all these schools. They have to have, schools don't go digging on their own without a representative of the Archaeological Society being around. In 2008, we visited the Archaeological in northern Greece, which has been excavated by the Canadians, and there were representatives there from the Archaeological Society of Greece working, but they're on site. The Australian Society, the Australian Institute came into being in 1980. However, the history of Australian involvement in archaeology goes back to 1860, when Professor Nicholson donated his classical collection to the University of Sydney. A Department of Archaeology was created in 1948, and the Chair of Archaeology was established in 1963, and its first dig was at Zavara on Ironborough. The second dig was at Torreni on the Hostilities Peninsula, the middle finger of the Hostilities Peninsula. These were done at a unofficial level. In other words, the Greek state was there and we sent archaeologists and they worked with them. But in 1980, we established the Australian Institute and formally set up an office there. We have a building there, and we also have a hostel for academics and students to stay when they're doing their research. It's in Kulkaki, which is just down from the old museum.
That's close to the Swedish Archaeological Institute, right?
Sorry?
That's close to the Swedish.
Well, yeah, it could be, but yeah, they're all there. It's around the corner from the Spanish consulate. But it's a very nice place in Athens to be. What have we got? Now, the Acropolis Museum has an interesting little side note here. After the liberation of the Athens area of Greece, the monuments of the Acropolis, remember this is the one item that stands out amongst everything when you walk around Athens, immediately came under the Greek state. They put a lock on it, so to speak. Limited investigations of the Acropolis took place in 1835 and again in 1837. But the site was systematically excavated between 1885 and 1890 by the archaeologist Cavadias. Right? So you can imagine the Greek state with all these monuments, with all these evrimata. There's a lot of work there. archaeology, if I had my chance again, I wouldn't do a bachelor's degree in business, I'd do it in science and archaeology, I think. A little note on the numismatic collection. Whilst the collection of the museum consists mainly of coins dating from the 14th century until today, depicting the financial evolution of ancient Greek to Byzantium to modern times. The museum is housed in the Schliemann residence, and the architect of that building was Ernst Ziller, who was the architect for a lot of the classical buildings of Athens. That Greece was able to do so much so quickly defies the modern bureaucracy that exists sometimes, that we accuse Greece of being too bureaucratic. But certainly in those key early years of liberation, they were very focused on their inheritance and its value. So it's every other country in the world, by the looks of things. But it was so important to them that they put that ahead of a lot of other things. They put a lot of energy into trying to save and preserve, because there'd been a lot of wanton destruction, accidental destruction, amateurism, and they tried to bring order into the archaeology. If you like to read more, and you should read more, there are some really good books that talk about the establishment of the Greek state, and in amongst it, there's little snippets about archaeology and its importance politically to Greece for a number of reasons: political, national, and historical. They wanted to connect their present with the past. Now, some people did not like that. They said, oh no, there's been too much interruption in between, you can't. But they did. And it was important to maintain that stance until today. And every day when we go out and read about discoveries in other countries, and there's Greek writing, Greek mosaics in far-flung corners of Bulgaria and Crimea and eastern Turkey, Zugma and other places. That's how far the culture extended, not the borders of Greece, but the culture. Where do we go from here? We've gone through wars, we've gone through pandemics, we're now going through another pandemic, we've gone through global financial crisis. Greece is not the richest country in the world, and yet it spends a lot on archaeology. It has to. It has to keep up. Some of their scientific achievements are quite amazing. They're using a lot of modern technology. They're very quick to jump on that. And the schools, the foreign schools, do help in that regard, especially the big boys. They have big archives in Greece. The British school has, for example, a photographic library of Thessaloniki before the fire of 1917. Right? Quite an amazing collection. The archaeology of the Dodecanese, which was started first by the Italians under Italian rule, and is now part of the effort of archaeology of the Dodecanese, an amazing, it's all in the old town, medieval town. It's huge. It goes back 150, nearly 200 years, when the Italians started there in the mid-1860s. Even before they occupied it in 1912, the Dodecanese, they had archaeologists there with in cahoot with the Ottomans to find things. And they rebuilt the castle at that time in about 1870, I think. Yeah, right? About 1870. So, what can we do to help? Well, organisations like the SA Friends and SA Friends groups in other states, we try and channel whatever funds we can through to the mother organisation, in our case the Australian Institute, to fund digs or fund students to go there and study, to continue this link with the past. And that is, it's important for Greece. Greece relies on these schools as much as they rely on Greece. Everyone who's an archaeologist wants to discover, and they go out there and looking very carefully. They document it, and they publish it, and the items are then displayed in museums. We haven't got enough museums. We have not got enough museums. Who's been to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens? Who's visited the Egyptian section? The Egyptian section. In the museum. The Egyptian section, when I went there in a long trip a few years ago, displayed about 700 unique items on the displays.
And they have more in the basement.
Below, there were nearly 7,000 to 8,000 items. And these are not from Egypt. They're not from Egypt, they're from Greece. Because Greece and Egypt were, through Hellenistic times, there was a lot of trade even before. So it's not as if the Greeks went and excavated and brought them back to Greece. No, they were found in Greece. And they're displayed. There's a couple of new museums. The museum at Sparta is brand new. They've just rebuilt. I haven't been to the new one, but next trip I must go. The museum at Bilos is new. It used to be the old one at Horta. Then there's an underwater museum, or a museum for underwater archaeology in Bilos. Beautiful. Who watches My Greek Odyssey?
Oh.
I mean, I like the guy,
Yeah.
and I don't necessarily agree with what he is, but I certainly like the archaeological side trips that he does. He's gone to an island next to where I live on Rhodes, which I've never been there. I didn't realise it was dating back to pre-classical Greek times. Amazing. That helps increase people's awareness of what we're on about. All I can say is more money is wanted. I hope you enjoyed that.